I thought it would be fun, but it's not fun, boys, I tell you, when you're getting shot at.
I was looking out the window of the plane, and that's when I saw that first plane get shot down.
In active combat, things are so chaotic. There's so much excitement, so much confusion, so much adrenaline that you don't really, honestly, truthfully, don't think that you're going to get shot and killed. You're certainly aware you're in a combat zone, and sooner or later it could happen.
When you look back at us today, the Lord must have been watching over us that day. We could have got murdered. We could have got killed.
Did you ever think about the fact that the word story is part of the word history? Well, everything that happens in history has a story. In this program, sponsored by the Pennsylvania Veterans Museum, we're going to bring you the real stories of Pennsylvania GIs who fought during World War II in Europe. Now, don't think this is ancient history. The war ended in 1945, but it wasn't that long ago. Our American way of life, our freedoms, like what clothes you wear, what music you listen to, the things that we take for granted were all seriously at risk back then. That's what this war was really about. Fighting against people who wanted to control the world and dictate not only how everyone should live, but who was allowed to live. A lot of people made a lot of sacrifices, and it's because of their sacrifice we continue to enjoy these freedoms today. Okay, we're going to crank back the timeline here and show you the world before World War II. If there was a World War II, there must have been a World War I, right? And there was. It was fought between 1914 and 1918. Now, people hoped that World War I would be the war to end all wars. But in fact, World War I actually created the conditions for World War II to break out 20 years later. Later that evening came the full launch of the invasion force. Over 175,000 men, 20,000 vehicles, 1,500 tanks. The Allies were on the move.
We boarded an LST. It's a very large ship. Can transport several tanks and several hundreds of men. And from there left England and crossed out into the English Channel. When we got near the Normandy coast, the troops left that ship by rope ladders down the side of the ship into landing craft, Higgins boats. And then the Higgins boats proceeded from there into the beach. Stepped off in 6 foot of water, way over my head. Fortunately, the fellow that was right ahead of me was a good bit taller than I was, and I grabbed a hold of his suspender straps and walked just a few feet more till I could touch bottom. In order to keep from drowning, I dropped everything. Rifle, had lost my helmet, my field pack with all of my supplies. I had nothing but the wet clothes that were on my back.
The first wave of soldiers hit the beaches of Normandy at dawn on June 6th, D-Day. The beaches had been divided into 5 sectors: Juno, Gold, Sword, Omaha, and Utah. The British and Canadians stormed the first 3 beaches, and the Americans jumped off the boats at Omaha and Utah. Just stop for a second and think of how brave these guys were. I mean, they were jumping off of boats, sometimes into deep water, and as soon as they stood up, the Germans were shooting at them. To avoid getting hit, soldiers had to somehow get on the beach and run as fast as they could to reach a low seawall for protection. Only they couldn't run. They were all carrying 50 pounds of gear. Steel helmet, M1 rifle, ammunition belt, canteen, backpack with a shovel, rations, first aid kit, grenades, gas mask, and a life belt. You try running up a beach soaking wet with all that stuff. It was nearly impossible. The soldiers dropped what they could and made a dash for the seawall. Well, the Germans didn't stop hammering these young guys, especially the ones on Omaha Beach. The Allies, especially the U.S., lost a lot of men that day, but a lot more men survived. At the end of the day, 155,000 Allied troops were standing on French soil. War. However, the Allies weren't giving up, not by a long shot. By October, they had stepped their big toes over the German border and captured the town of Aachen. So, the Allies kept pushing the Germans back and back. They thought the tide was turning, but they hadn't counted on a last desperate move by Hitler. The Allies had been dropping bombs on his country for years. Hitler had lost over 3.3 million men. His Luftwaffe Air Force was pretty much gone. He was hanging on by a thread, but he was hanging on. He decided instead of his army moving in retreat, they were going to attack. And they knew right where to do it, where Allied lines were weakest, in the Ardennes forest in Belgium. It was the campaign that became known as the Battle of the Bulge.
Well, we were told that the war was going to be over by Christmas. Jubilation. Well, we could do this. This is easy. And all of a sudden, what comes along was the Battle of the Bulge. What is the Battle of the Bulge? Well, our lines were extended from Holland into France, and no one ever thought that the Germans would come through the Ardennes, and so we only had spotty infantrymen up on the front lines. And when this came along, we were told, our company was assembled in the port of Antwerp and told that our job now was to get as many tanks up to the front lines as we could. We were now an essential part of the Battle of the Bulge.
We were in the Saar region in December, in December the 16th, when the Battle of the Bulge broke out. We were better than 100 miles from the Ardennes, where the Germans had broken through. And history will tell you that they broke through with tremendous force. Our forces were just pummeled and totally overrun and outnumbered. It was utter chaos for a number of hours. And no one, including the Allied High Command, had counted on this massive German counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of the Ardennes, on December the 16th, 1944. We were not equipped with winter clothing. We did not have gloves. We had just a small light jacket. Did have wool uniforms and no winter underwear. Frostbite was a huge, huge problem.
The winter of 1944 was one of the coldest ever. Because of the weather, Allied planes couldn't fly. That meant no ammunition or food drops. Soldiers had to make do with what they had. And no bombing runs either. The Allies were pinned down by German troops for several days. Bastogne is the name of the town you hear a lot when people talk about the Battle of the Bulge. It's famous because that's where the 101st Airborne was surrounded. These were the men from the Band of Brothers miniseries. Somehow they managed to hold off the Germans until the snow stopped and the Allies could get their planes back in the air again. Then, on December 27th, Patton's 4th Armored Division got through to Bastogne and relieved the 101st. In 2 weeks, the Allies gained back all the ground they had lost, but because of all the snow, it took them till the end of January to get the Germans to retreat.